Hi everyone, welcome to the course on network security and penetration testing. We are covering a book called Guide to Computer Forensics and Investigations. And in this chapter, we'll be talking about virtual machine forensics, live acquisitions, and network forensics. The objectives of this chapter are that we'll explain standard procedures for conducting forensics analysis of virtual machines. Since they are different than the actual computers, these are virtual machines, so there are different procedures for that. We'll describe the process of a live acquisition if the servers are running and we want to take the data, or we need to retrieve the data from those machines, how we'll do that. Then we'll explain how the network intrusion and unauthorized access takes place on the network. So we'll have to set up a network environment in order to check all those things. We'll be describing about the standard procedures in network forensics and network monitoring tools, with the help of which we can monitor the packets and we can understand what's going on the network. An overview about the virtual machines is that we know that virtual machines are very common for both personal and business use. If we need to investigate anything, or if we want to test any software or application on our computer and we think that it might harm our base operating system, we can easily install virtual machines on our computer, provided the host computer, which is your computer, is powerful enough to handle the virtual machines. Now, there are lots of reasons of using virtual machines. First of all, it can offset the hardware cost for the companies. Instead of buying the computers, which are required dedicated for those purposes, you can create a virtual machine on a computer itself and run the applications on it. We are usually running legacy applications or uncommon operating systems which are not used in our organization. Sometimes we have the softwares which are still working on Windows XP or Windows 7, whereas we have upgraded the infrastructure of the organization and we are using Windows 10. So in order to keep the computers, the virtual machines, away from the outside world or to be accessible within the network only, we set up the virtual machine so that instead of setting up a complete fully working machine on the network, we can use a virtual machine which will be used only during the time when we need those applications, and after that we'll simply power them off. The software for which we use virtual machines on is called hypervisor. This is the software which is running virtual machines on it, and it's controlling the overall resources and the virtual machine on the computers. Now they have categorized the virtual machines into two categories, type 1 and type 2. Now let's try to understand what is a type 1 hypervisor. Type 1 hypervisor runs on a bare metal, means that it is a hardware backed hypervisor which is running virtual machines. A bare metal means it loads on a physical hardware and doesn't require a separate operating system. Although many type 1 hypervisors are incorporated by Linux based operating systems, we'll be discussing it later. Thousands of machines can work on a type 1 hypervisor, provided that you have the infrastructure for that, like ESXis and etc. from VMware, with the help of which you can run lots of virtual machines together. A type 2 hypervisor rests on top of an existing operating system such as Windows, Linux, or Mac operating system, etc. And there are lots of tools available for that. We'll be discussing about them later in the chapter. I have the tutorials available for VMware and VirtualBox on the same channel. You can follow the tutorials in order to set up Windows 10 virtual machines. Now these type 2 hypervisors are used to install different operating systems, whether they are 32-bit or 64-bit, Linux, Mac operating systems, even Sun Solaris. So there are lots of options available. Now it's a matter of choice which one is the preferred choice for your organization or the kind of setup that you have. Further, they are explaining over here the type 2 hypervisors are usually the ones you'll find loaded on suspect's machine. Persons will be running a hypervisor on their computer, and any kind of operations which they hide from, which they want to hide from the network, and they don't want the network admins to keep an eye on. Maybe they'll set up a virtual machines. They'll be launching different attacks and different kind of softwares and scenarios like that on the type 2 hypervisors. Now, keep one thing in mind when we are talking about setting up a virtual machine on your host computer. It means setting up a virtual machine on your computer. If you are installing it yourself, maybe you'll not have the admin privileges on the main host computer, but once you'll install the virtual machine, you'll have full privileges on it. It means you can install anything, you can uninstall anything, there won't be any antivirus solution, and it's limitless. You can do whatever you want to do as your personal computer. That's why in the organizations we make sure that individuals don't have any admin access to the computers, where they can install any application on the computer. Whether the latest computers are used in the organization and they don't require any virtualization on those computers, we deliberately disable the feature of virtualization from the motherboard, so that even if somehow they'll be able to install the software on the computer for virtualization, they won't be able to run the virtual machines on the computers. Now, type 1 hypervisors are typically loaded on the servers or workstation, and they usually have a huge RAM and a huge storage. Now, RAM would be available on the server itself, but the storage is usually a shared storage which is shared by all virtual machines which are running on a type 1 hypervisor. Now, in order to set up type 2 hypervisor on your machine, you'll have to enable the virtualization in the BIOS before you can attempt to install any hypervisor on the computer. That's a basic setting which is required in most of the latest laptops and workstations. It's enabled by default, but if it's not enabled, you can go to virtualization technology and you can enable those settings on the BIOS. Now, virtualization technology is an Intel CPU designed for the security and performance enhancements that would enable the BIOS to support the virtualization on those computers. If you'll not enable these settings on the computer, you'll still be able to install the software, but once you'll try to run any virtual machine, you'll get some error messages on the computer. Virtualization machine extensions, which are VMX instruction set created for Intel processors, and that can handle the virtualization very well on those computers. Now, mostly widely used type 2 hypervisors are Parallels, that's for Mac operating systems, and it comes in with Macintosh OS. And then we have KVM, kernel-based virtual machines for Linux operating systems. Then we have Microsoft Hyper-V. Again, that's a free version of the hypervisor, which comes with Windows 10 Professional. You'll not find it in Windows 10 Home. It's built into Windows 10. All you need to do is you need to enable it by going to Programs and Features and enable the feature for Hyper-V. Now, VMware Workstation Player is a free version which is available on their website. We have a tutorial, as I told you, available, but that's a player. If you want to go for VMware Workstation Professional, which you want to use in the organization for production purposes, you'll have to buy a pro version. Player version is free, fairly good. You can install any operating system on it and test it, including the tablets. That can install Hyper-V server on it. You can create encrypted VMs. It can support up to 16 CPUs and 8 terabyte of storage and 20 virtual machines. Now they are just showing that they are trying to install a virtual machine, which is Ubuntu, and they are defining the path for that. As far as we have seen in the student labs, and practically if you are installing it in the C drive, we usually tend to have some problems in the virtual machine. So I don't recommend installing it in C. Rather go for any other directory which is not in the C drive. Now, type 2 hypervisors are mostly widely used these days because we are using VirtualBox in most of the machines, which is an open source software available from Oracle. It supports Windows and Linux as well as Macintosh and Solaris. It allows selecting different types associated with other applications like VMware, VMDK, which are VMware products, or if you have any virtual machines from VMware Workstation, etc., they can be imported in this one, and even it can import the parallel hard disk, which is a Macintosh based virtual machine or virtualization software. Type 2 hypervisors come with templates for different operating systems. So if you are installing Windows XP or Windows 7 or 8 or 10, Depends, you can simply select it from the drop down list. Even it can install different operating systems which are 32-bit or 64-bit. Now we'll see how can we conduct investigation on a type 2 hypervisor. Remember, it's a hypervisor which is installed on top of your operating system. So that's a type 2. Now the first step that we can do is that we'll have to acquire the forensics image of the host computer as well as the network logs. It's very important for the host machine because eventually the virtual machine would be working through the host machine. So you'll have to collect all IP logs which are generated, and through the network team or firewall logs which we can collect by linking the VM IP address to the log files, and then we can determine that which websites the VM accessed or which network clients or the nearby computers it accessed, whether it was only outside the network or within the network. So all details related to those IP addresses which are to and from that computer is usually conducted. Now determine whether the VM is on the host computer. Look into the user documents or check in the registry settings for any existence of the virtual network adapter. Sometimes it happens that if the person who's the one responsible for launching the attacks and things like that, they delete the virtual machine from the computer. So it's very important to check in the registry settings, because if even you'll uninstall a virtual machine or if you'll delete it from the computer, the entries will be there in the registry of the computer. Further, you can even check the existence of a network adapter which is found in the network tools. As you can see over here, change the adapter settings in Ethernet and you'll find different adapters appearing over there. In addition to searching for the network adapters, you need to determine whether the USB drives have been attached to the host through which you were connecting any virtual machines. They could have live VMs running on them. Since the footprint of a virtual machine, especially the Linux ones, is so small that you can easily install it on a USB disk, so it's very important to investigate that whether the machines existed on the actual hard drive of the host computer or they were running directly from the USBs. A VM can also be nested inside other VMs so that the host machine or a USB drive, so like they'll install a virtual machine on a host computer, and then inside that virtual machine you can install another virtual machine. Some newer Windows system logs, when the USB drives are attached, search the Windows registry to find the logs for that. And as you can see that it's running a virtual machine of Ubuntu on VMware Player. Now follow the consistent procedure to image the host machine first of all, so that you'll collect all relevant details about the virtual machines or any other softwares which were installed on the computer. Then locate the virtualization software, which one was used, whether it was VMware, Hyper-V, or VirtualBox, or if it was Mac operating system, if they were using Windows Parallels. Locate the virtualization software of the VM using the information learned about the extensions of the files. The extensions for VirtualBox, VMware, Parallels, and Hyper-V are all different. So by comparing the extensions or by looking at the extensions, you can easily tell that the virtual machine belongs to which kind of hypervisor. Record the hashes which are associated to the virtual machines, and then open the virtual machine as an image for the forensic software to create the forensics image, and you can mount the virtual machine as a drive. Now, as I told you that virtual machine files which are generated by VMware or VirtualBox can be incorporated in each other. So once that's done, you can mount the entire operating system, not necessarily on the same host machine, but as long as you have the snapshot or the original image of the virtual machine, you can load it on any computer for investigative purposes. Live acquisition of virtual machines are often necessary because they include the snapshot which records the state of the virtual machine at a particular moment of time. It records only the changes in the state, not a complete backup, and then when acquiring an image of a VM file, snapshots might not be included. So that's why we need to do that on a live basis. In this case, you can have only the original VM and it would have all the details about the virtual machines which are running on it. Doing like acquisition of a VM is important to make sure snapshots are incorporated and they are appearing in a sequential manner. Now they are saying that you can follow the steps in order to do the exercises in the book. And then conducting the investigation. Other VM examination methods are FTK Imager, which is a tool for forensics toolkit. Having the Magnet XEM or the OS Forensics can mount different virtual machines as an external drive. You can even look into the contents of the different partitions which were there on a virtual machine. By mounting a VM as a drive, you can make it behave more like a physical computer. Allows you to do the same operations as you do on a computer on a static hard drive. You can make a copy of the forensics image, and then you can run it on different machines as I told you, and start it in a live VM for the forensics analysis. Using the VMs as the forensics tools, investigators use VM to run forensics tools stored on a USB drives. If you want to install any virtual machine, for example Kali Linux and stuff like that, usually they have a pre-built ISO version or a VMDK or a virtual machine file appearing on their website. All you need to do is directly download it, so that you don't need to install it or anything. You'll have to simply import it in your virtualization software and you'll be able to run it, and it would save your time for the installation and all those things. Now let's look into working with type 1 hypervisors. Let me remind you again, type 1 hypervisors are the one which works on a hardware. Type 1 hypervisors, the section is meant to help you understand the impact of type 1 hypervisors have on the forensics analysis. Having a good working relationship with the network administrators and the lead technicians can help you on setting up the type 1 hypervisors. It can be installed on a VM for testing purposes, and the capability is limited by the amount of the available RAM, storage, and throughput of the type 1 hypervisors. Common type of hypervisors are VMware vSphere. Of course, they are not free. Some of them are free. For some of them, you'll have to pay an annual fee in order to maintain the support and in order to run the virtual machines on it. Then we have Microsoft Hyper-V 2016, and then Zen Project Zen Server. Then we have from IBM and Parallels from Mac. We can see the setup of it in our book. And now we'll try to learn what are the methods for performing a live acquisition on virtual machines. Now the last topic we'll be covering today would be performing live acquisitions on virtual machines. Live acquisitions are especially useful when you're dealing with active network intrusion attacks which are happening at that moment of time. Now we all know that if the system will reboot or will make any changes, we might not get the evidence which is there and the data which is available in the RAM. Live acquisitions is done well before taking a system offline. They are also becoming a necessity these days because you never know if the system is encrypted or the hard drives are encrypted. You'll not be able to get the data. So that's why the best option is to do it when the system is running. Attacks might leave footprints only in the running processes or RAM, since it's keeping certain information, or the processes of different tasks or the scripts that they are running. You can get that details from the RAM. Live acquisition don't follow the typical forensics procedures. You can follow the things which suits your environment the best. Then we have an order of volatility. It's the information that how long the data would remain on the hard drive on the computer. Maybe if you run checksum, or if it is the computer is a forced shutdown and it's starting it and fixing the bad sectors on the computer, there are high chances that you lose the evidence which you were looking for. Now the second step is to create a downloadable bootable forensic CD or a USB disk. With the help of that, you can boot a computer in its own environment. We call it pre-executable environment, and we can have certain tools on it with the help of which we can conduct the analysis. and then we can make sure to keep a log of each and everything, whatever we are finding, whatever we are doing on the computer, or the tools we are using. A network drive is an ideal thing because you don't need to carry the hard disk or a USB along. As long as you're collecting any information, you can simply copy it on the external drive or an attached storage. Keep a copy of the physical memory of the computer. It is very important because mostly it has very critical information in it. The next step here is depending on the incident you are investigating. What kind of investigation is it, whether it's a banking sector or a marketing sector, or it's about healthcare and stuff. Be sure to get a forensics digital hash of all the files that you have. I would prefer having the digital hash separately for the files or the data, and a digital hash of the operating system and files, and a combined digital hash of the entire system. So in that way you have different options to compare and to see that how much data has been changed at a certain moment of time. That's it for today. We'll be covering rest of the chapter in our next lecture. Thank you very much.